You're not the only one who needs firewood, Mr. Calder. Don't act like it's a crime to share.
That was Gwen Harrow, president of the Willow Creek Row HOA, standing in my backyard like she owned it. She wasn't asking, she wasn't explaining. She was holding a split log from my winter stack, like it had her name burned into the grain. She turned it in her hands, inspecting the smooth seal on the base, without a clue what she was holding. One of the hollow ones. One of mine. The moment that log cleared the edge of my property, it triggered a silent motion relay I'd rigged into the west fence line. 3 cameras, 4 timestamps, and a mirrored file already uploading to a secure external drive. Gwen thought she was confiscating firewood. She didn't know I'd replaced half the stack with handcrafted decoys, hollow logs packed with steel ballast, and a layer of smoke resin to mimic the scent of stored combustibles. She didn't know the caps were etched with micro timestamps. And she sure as hell didn't know she'd just stepped into a forensic trap, laid by the same man who used to train fire marshals on evidence preservation. They thought I was just another quiet widower with a broken knee and too much time. They didn't know I was Bram Calder, retired municipal fire safety engineer, and the guy who helped design this county's combustible ordinance. If you've ever had to outmaneuver someone who abuses power, hit subscribe, because Gwen just walked into the worst mistake of her HOA career. I don't do threats, I do documentation. My daughter's oxygen unit runs on backup heat. My mother's arthritis flares if her room drops below 68. The firewood Gwen keeps stealing? It's not for roasting marshmallows. It's the only system we have left that doesn't fail when the grid flickers. And she's taken it 3 times. Once with a smile. Once with a citation left under my door. Once when Mia was home alone and caught her on camera dragging it away. They said I was exaggerating, that it was a community safety sweep. But last week I caught a marked log from my shed in Gwen's friend Carl's pit, 2 blocks over. Same knot grain, same pine tag. So I adapted. The decoys look real, feel real, way close enough to pass casual lift tests. But one shake, one impact, and you'd know they're wrong. That's the point. Gwen took the bait because she assumed I wouldn't fight back. "You're violating property line seizure laws," I said, stepping out from behind the lilac arbor. "And unless you've got board authorization for this visit, you're trespassing." She barely glanced at me. "We have authority to act when residents endanger others." And I saw unstacked debris from the sidewalk. I kept my voice calm. The stack's 6 inches from the fence, capped, tagged, and covered. But don't let that stop you. I nodded at the log in her hand. Her fingers tightened around it instinctively. Then she looked at it, really looked at it. That pause, that single beat of silence, that's when I knew. She wasn't sure what she was holding anymore. And for someone like Gwen, doubt is dangerous. The firewood wasn't just heat. It was my promise to Mia, to my mother, to myself. After a winter power failure nearly took both of them, I swore I'd never depend on the grid again. I rebuilt this entire heating system with my own hands. So when Gwen Harrow tried to steal our firewood again, I made sure this time she took the wrong piece. 2 hours after Gwen walked off with a decoy log, the HOA bulletin went live. Community reminder. In accordance with seasonal safety inspections, select debris and fire hazards will be removed without notice for resident protection. Thank you for your cooperation. There was no signature, no timestamp, no reference to any bylaw, just a pixelated clip art flame and a hollow warning. That's how she always operated. Vague enough to scare the passive ones, but just legal enough to dodge accountability. I'd seen it before. Vague memos, broad rules. And then her inner circle would start showing up with new patio firewood they didn't buy. By noon, I'd counted 3 more houses with reclaimed wood bundles out front. One of them had my initials burned faintly into the bark. Another still had the fluorescent marker I'd used for seasoning inventory. This wasn't about safety. It never was. Gwen was taking what she wanted and sharing it to buy loyalty. I didn't say a word, not yet. Instead, I opened the community forum. Willow Talk. What used to be a gardening chat had become a panopticon of HOA fear. If you posted anything critical, the board would summon you to mediation. But sometimes, people slipped up. Big thanks to Gwen and Orrin for redistributing excess firewood. One post read, signed by Cheryl L., a longtime Gwen loyalist. We were low and didn't even have to ask. There it was, the tell. They knew where it came from, and they didn't care. I took a screenshot, then another. I cataloged the date, time, and post ID. Still, I said nothing. It wasn't until the fourth comment thread that someone else broke the silence. Anyone know why half of Oak Path is missing their stacks? Mine was behind a tarp and chained. That came from Leora Vance, PTA president, 2 kids. Used to host summer fire pit nights before Gwen shut down the Maple Hollow communal site. Her post didn't last long, 30 minutes, maybe 40. Then it vanished. But not before 5 other neighbors chimed in, quietly, hesitantly. Mine too, gone yesterday. We thought it was termites, but the chain was broken. I had a permit tag on mine, still taken. And then one from a name I didn't recognize. Check under your logs. If they're marked, that's proof. She's taking tagged piles. I sat back. Someone else had marked theirs too. I wasn't alone, but most of the thread was silent, or cleaned up. The HOA moderators worked fast. By dusk, the only post left was Cheryl's glowing praise. Still, I had what I needed. That night, I took a quiet walk past 3 blocks of houses. I didn't knock, didn't ask questions. I just looked. 10 houses. 7 had firewood bundles out front. 5 of them had red surveyor's tape on at least one log, the same kind Gwen claimed was a safety code warning. It wasn't. She was using the tape to tag what she planned to take, like marking groceries. I returned home and logged every address, every bundle, every taped piece. The next morning, the final straw came. I found a slip on my door. Excess debris noted. Woodpile will be subject to removal within 48 hours. Failure to comply may result in fines. There was no contact name, just a printed notice. A checkbox next to combustible risk. My woodpile hadn't moved, covered, sealed, and compliant, down to the inch. But Gwen had made her move official. This wasn't oversight, it was theft with paperwork. And she was escalating. I looked toward the neighbor's yard, where Orrin was dragging a dolly full of split maple into Cheryl's side gate. He didn't look up, just unloaded, locked the gate, and turned back toward the HOA golf cart. I could see it in his shoulders, something brittle, something pulled too tight. He wasn't just following orders, he was living inside them. I wrote down the time, logged the route, marked the tape. This wasn't about firewood anymore. It was about control. And Gwen Harrow was starting to lose hers. Orrin Tully looked like a man who used to stand straighter. You could see it in the way his shoulders rolled forward now, like he was always expecting to be hit from behind. I first met him 3 years ago, when I moved into Willow Creek Row after my wife passed. Back then, he was the guy who helped me unload cinder blocks from the truck without being asked. Said his knees were shot from landscaping, but he did it anyway. Now, I watched him from my driveway as he carried another armful of logs, this time from the Hartman's side yard. It wasn't public space. It wasn't marked. Just a modest pile of birch, wrapped in nylon cord, stacked under an overhang. He paused before reaching the sidewalk, looked over his shoulder once, then again. He saw me watching. "Morning," I said, keeping it casual. He hesitated, then gave a tight nod, like someone bracing for a blow that didn't come. "That Hartman's pile?" I asked. He shifted the bundle in his arms. "Gwen said it was a hazard, said she left a notice." "She didn't." His eyes darted down. "Wasn't my call." "I know." I pointed gently toward my fence. "But that one was. You took it last week." Orrin winced just enough to register. "I was told it was abandoned." I didn't press. Not yet. He loaded the logs into the HOA cart. No clipboard, no signatures. Just another unrecorded transfer. As he climbed into the driver's seat, I caught the faintest shake in his left hand. The same kind I used to see in the young inspectors after their first death scene. Not fear, guilt that settled deep and started to rot. The cart buzzed away, and I stood there, heart thudding, not with anger, but something quieter, sadder. Later that afternoon, I saw Orrin again. He was parked at the maintenance shed near the Maple Hollow fire pit. The pit itself was cold, locked behind a steel fence Gwen had installed after claiming it was encouraging unsafe gatherings. I walked past without saying a word, but I saw it, stacked behind the gate, under tarp, logs, dozens, a mix of oak, birch, and cedar. Some bore marks I recognized, some were mine. I kept walking. That night, it rained. just enough to soften the air, not enough to cool it. I found myself pacing the living room, watching the feed from the side yard camera Gwen had triggered the day before. It replayed over and over, her lifting the hollow log, not questioning why it felt different. I paused the footage and zoomed in on Orrin, visible in the background, standing by the cart. His face wasn't smug, it wasn't complicit, it was tired. The kind of tired you only get when the job starts scraping at your conscience. I decided to test the line. I printed 3 stills, 2 of Gwen taking the log, 1 of Orrin in frame. I left them in an envelope. No message, no threat, just evidence. The next morning, I taped it to the side of the HOA cart. By mid-afternoon, the cart was gone from its usual spot. So was Orrin. That evening, I heard the crunch of boots in gravel. I opened the door to find nothing there, but near the mat was a single slip of folded paper, typed, no name. She told me the logs would be disposed, not redistributed. I didn't know about the tags. A confession, quiet, careful, but real. It wasn't enough to take Gwen down, not yet. But it meant something was cracking. The man who'd once helped me move stone without being asked had just taken his first step back. And somewhere under all the fear and silence, Orrin Tully still remembered the difference between right and wrong. The citation envelope was bright yellow this time, stuck halfway under the doormat like a passive-aggressive flag. Second notice, firewood removal order, final warning. Same checkbox for combustible risk. Same blank space for signature. Still no board vote, no record, no timestamp. But this one came with an added line, bolded at the bottom. Failure to comply may result in formal violation and monthly fines. I stood on the porch with it in my hand, watching the sky darken towards sleet. They'd timed it, of course. Tomorrow's forecast called for sub-freezing temps and wind chill warnings. I'd already restacked the real firewood in a steel-sealed rack, chained and capped, regulation compliant down to the inch. The decoy logs still sat on top, unchanged, untouched since Gwen's little excursion. She hadn't mentioned them, not publicly, which meant she was either waiting or scrambling. I walked back inside and closed the door behind me. Mia was in the den with my mother, watching an old nature documentary. The lights were dim, the stove was already running. Quiet, consistent heat, fed by 2 of the cleanest splits I'd seasoned last summer. I stared at the flames for a long minute. Then I opened the lockbox. Inside, a flash drive, a printed timestamp sheet, 3 stills of Gwen removing the decoy log, and the typed note Orrin had left me. I added the yellow citation to the pile, then closed the box again. I didn't want to use any of it, not yet. I wanted them to stop, to reconsider. But I knew Gwen Harrow. She didn't back down. She doubled down. I spent the afternoon at my workbench in the garage, inspecting the second batch of hollow logs. These ones were sealed tighter, slightly heavier. I'd adjusted the weight so they'd pass a lazy lift check. Each base had a burn mark with my initials and a unique time code etched in the resin lip. Not one of them could be mistaken for anything real, unless you weren't supposed to be touching them in the first place. By nightfall, the cart came. I saw it through the living room camera, silent as ever. This time, it wasn't Orrin behind the wheel. It was someone new, a part-timer I didn't recognize. He didn't come near my property, just parked across the street, idling, watching. At 10:43 p.m., I received an email from HOA Enforcement. To ensure community safety, mandatory review of combustible storage practices is scheduled for Bram Calder's property, Friday at 10 a.m. Please prepare to comply. Willow Creek Compliance Division. No signature, no badge number, just the illusion of formality. They were ramping up, again. I replied with a single sentence. Any entry onto my property without warrant or prior consent will be treated as unlawful trespass under County Code, Po 26-114. Then I called Belf Quinn. He didn't pick up, but I left a message. Calm, direct. Belf, this is Bram Calder. Just a courtesy call. You and I both know Gwen hasn't brought these seizures to a board vote. If she tries to send someone on Friday without proper notice, I'll be filing with code enforcement. There are cameras, logs, and I have documentation going back a month. I'd prefer not to escalate, unless I'm forced. I hung up. 10 minutes later, I got a reply from Belf's personal email. Not authorized, no vote. I'll speak to her tomorrow. He knew. He'd known. The only difference now was the quiet line he'd drawn with those 3 words. Not authorized. It wouldn't stop her. But it meant Gwen was no longer protected by a silent board. She was flying solo. And when this came apart, it wouldn't just be about Firewood. It would be about what happens when someone like Gwen forgets the rules apply to her, too. The burn marks on the log were mine. Clean, sharp, unmistakable. A single diagonal slash across the end grain, just beneath the knot. I used a custom iron to stamp them, same as I had for 2 decades in inspections. That way, I could always trace my stock when it moved through regulated heat zones. And this one was sitting in Cheryl Lott's front pit like she'd bought it herself. I didn't knock, didn't need to. The evidence didn't require confrontation. It required observation. The fire pit was active, just barely. Orange coals clung to the logs, smoke curling up into the breeze. I crouched by the side path under cover of dusk and watched Cheryl dump 2 more logs onto the pile from a plastic bin. One had another faint mark, a resin chip from the decoy batch I'd discarded. Not dangerous, just out of spec. But the 3rd log, my timestamp. 11:42 a.m., July 19th. That log had sat in my stack under cover all summer. I hadn't moved it since. It hadn't been sold, hadn't been gifted. It had been taken. I took a photo, then another, framing the log, the pit, Cheryl's stoop. I used a measuring overlay app to map the burn mark relative to the ring size. When I returned home, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt cold. Not because Cheryl had my wood, because she'd posted just yesterday in Willow Talk, praising Gwen for redistributing excess fuel to families in need. The theft wasn't just quiet anymore. It was public, framed as charity, except nobody asked the families they took it from. That night, I cataloged every photo and paired them with GPS metadata and log IDs from my burn sheets. 12 logs missing, 7 confirmed redistributed, 5 unaccounted for. I spent an hour reviewing old images from my yard cam, watching Orrin, cart after cart, offloading without paperwork. Gwen never appeared on those runs, only that one time. The one time she took the hollow log herself, and still, she said nothing. No email, no follow-up. Because the moment she acknowledged it, she'd validate my claim. The next morning, I visited City Hall, not to file a complaint, yet, but to pull the public use record on the HOA's bylaws and latest board approvals. The front desk clerk printed 2 years of meeting minutes for me. I took them to the corner reading desk and skimmed for one thing: Firewood seizure policy. Nothing. I found noise ordinances, dog leash reminders, a vote on sidewalk repainting, but not a single entry recording any formal authorization for combustible material removal. No vote, no resolution, which meant Gwen's notices had no legal standing. I made copies of the relevant pages, date-stamped them at the front desk. By mid-afternoon, I was back home, sealing the copies in an evidence sleeve along with the decoy log footage. When I stepped out front to check the mailbox, Belf Quinn was already there, standing by his silver hybrid, tie askew, folder in hand. "I never approved any of it," he said before I could speak. "She acted on her own." I said nothing, just waited. She told us it was temporary, that it wasn't worth documenting, said it was just cleanup. "You know that's not true," I said quietly. He nodded. "I do now." I glanced at the folder he held. He hesitated, then handed it to me. Inside were internal HOA memos, printed emails. Gwen to Orrin, Gwen to Cheryl, a few marked with "delete after read" in the subject line. One of them referenced my lot directly. "Get Orrin to pull the pine before Friday. Ignore Calder's notice. He won't escalate." She'd underestimated me. Belf looked up. "Do what you have to do. I won't stop it." I didn't thank him. We weren't allies, but the silence between us felt like clearance. The next move was mine. The power flickered at 1:17 a.m. Just once, long enough to reset the stove's blower fan and trigger the alarm on Mia's oxygen regulator. I was already out of bed before the chime finished its second tone. By the time I reached her room, the backup valve had kicked in, but the pressure was low. I adjusted the manual feed, checked the tank line, then pulled the cord on the emergency igniter. The wood stove hissed, caught, and flared to life in a breath of orange and blue. I didn't need anyone to tell me what would have happened if the logs hadn't been there. If Gwen's redistribution had left me short just one more piece, the power hadn't even gone out for 5 minutes. That's all it would have taken. Mia was still asleep, her chest rising under the thick quilt, cheeks pink from the sudden heat. But my hands were shaking. I stepped outside barefoot into the raw bite of air. The deck boards were slick with ice, the kind that creeps up from wet wood at night and hides under thin frost. I didn't care. I needed the cold. The decoy logs were still stacked under the tarp, unmoved, untouched since Gwen's last visit. She hadn't dared come back herself, but her reach was everywhere. I stood there and stared at them, knowing this was it. No more documenting, no more waiting for her to hang herself with bad optics. It was time to finish what I started. By morning, I had 3 folders ready, each one packed with everything I'd gathered over the last 3 weeks. The stills of Gwen holding the hollow log, the burned timestamp logs showing wood traced from my yard to Cheryl's fire pit, screenshots from Willow Talk posts, deleted but captured, Belf's printed memos, the HOA meeting minutes showing no seizure policy ever voted on, and the typed confession from Orrin, still unsigned but telling in its clarity. The first folder went to Malik Reza, City Code Enforcement. The second to Helena Cross, the insurance investigator, listed in the HOA's liability policy packet. The third went straight to my lawyer. I knew what would happen next. Malik wouldn't make a scene. He'd schedule an unannounced visit and bring his codebook with him. Helena, though, her office had a reputation. If she smelled exposure risk, it'd escalate. HOA boards like Gwen's operated on plausible silence. But insurance companies didn't gamble on unfiled violations. Before noon, I dropped the envelopes off myself. One at City Hall, one at the downtown claims office. The last I mailed certified. Then I went home and waited. Around 4 p.m., Orrin knocked on my door. He didn't wait for me to invite him in, just stood on the steps, cap in hand, eyes low. "I didn't know she'd gone that far," he said. "Not with your daughter." "She's not the only one at risk," I said. He nodded. "I'll talk if they ask. Just don't burn me with it." "I won't," I said. "You came clean. That matters." He reached into his coat pocket and handed me something, an access key card. HOA Maintenance Staff ID, Level 3 Permissions. "I shouldn't give you this," he muttered. "But if Reza or Cross needs to verify site access, it gets you through the common areas." "You sure?" I asked. "She crossed the line," he said. "I'm done covering for her." After he left, I turned the card over in my hand. His name, his employee number. The last day Gwen would get to speak through someone else's actions. That night, I made a backup of everything. One copy in my safe, one in a cloud drive. I labeled it plainly: Willow Creek, Fraud, Chain, Doe 1. And then I slept. Not because I felt peace, but because I knew Gwen wouldn't be. Because by the time she woke up tomorrow, her war over Firewood was no longer a quiet game of fines and memos. It was an investigation. Orrin didn't show up to work the next day. The HOA cart sat parked beside the maintenance shed, keys still hanging from the ignition like someone left in a hurry. The morning bulletin was late. No one swept the communal walkways, and for the first time in weeks, Gwen Harrow's voice was absent from the neighborhood. By 10:06 a.m., Malik Reza's city vehicle pulled into the loop by the Maple Hollow fire pit. White Crown Vic, no sirens. Just a clipboard on the dash and a quiet authority that made residents peek through their blinds. I didn't meet him there. That wasn't the plan. Instead, I watched from my kitchen window as he stepped out in a windbreaker marked City Code and walked straight to the fire pit gate. He had the key card I'd mailed in the folder, Orrin's pass, and with it, he bypassed the maintenance latch without calling anyone for access. 2 minutes later, he was inside the fenced storage zone, and 5 minutes after that, he was squatting beside the covered stack of logs, flipping through them one by one, tagging each with a color-coded sticker, one red, 2 orange, several green. By the time I arrived outside, he had already laid out a temporary evidence mat. A few neighbors stood awkwardly across the sidewalk, whispering. Cheryl Lott among them. She looked pale. Malik spotted me and nodded once. "You Bram Calder?" "I am." He held up a gloved hand. "Need you to confirm the burn marks on these. You brought logs with etchings in the resin cap. You stated a unique time code." I stepped under the fence rail and pointed to the third log in his lineup. That one. Burn slash, right through the knot. Initials below the grain ring, right side. Malik rotated the log and nodded. Matches the photo record. He moved to the next one. This was found at the base of the stack. No initials, but red tape wrapped twice, tied reverse left. Standard HOA seizure tag, yes? It's her mark, I said. Gwen's. She's been using it to flag which piles to take. He made a note on his tablet, then paused. This storage site. It's unregulated, unsecured, and within 10 feet of the shared greenway. That's 2 separate violations if combustible materials are stockpiled for redistribution without inspection. She never submitted a plan, I added. I pulled the board minutes myself. No authorization was ever voted on. Malik glanced up at that. You filed the complaint correctly. Insurance already flagged it. What about the redistribution? His voice stayed calm even. We'll confirm movement of tagged property without consent. If proven, that's unlawful conversion. Could trigger civil liability if property was marked and documented. He packed the logs back into evidence sleeves. I'll finish my report. You'll be copied. As he walked away, Cheryl called out from across the street. What's going on here? Why is the city involved? Malik didn't stop walking. He didn't need to. Because 10 minutes later, the second vehicle pulled in. This one was marked, navy blue SUV. Logo, Mutual Home and Liability, Regional Office. Helena Cross stepped out in a tailored coat, tablet in hand, sunglasses already halfway down her nose. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She walked right to the pit gate, scanned it, then turned slowly in place, taking in the stacked bundles, the lack of signage, the proximity to community space. Her assistant arrived behind her with a DSLR camera and a digital clipboard. They worked fast. Angles, dimensions, asset tagging. I didn't move, and neither did Cheryl, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her porch railing. Helena spotted me and approached. Mr. Calder? Yes. Your report included time-stamped logs and municipal record scans. Excellent formatting. She adjusted her glasses. If the board president initiated material redistribution without inventory control, that's a breach of carrier compliance. This location may void their coverage until we complete audit review. She didn't raise her voice, but every word landed like a blade. By the time she was done, Gwen's entire operation wasn't just exposed, it was radioactive. I found Gwen at the clubhouse the next morning, sitting alone behind the front desk like nothing had changed. The building was supposed to be closed on Thursdays, reserved for maintenance and HOA board prep. But her car was out front, idling, windshield half frozen in the morning chill. She hadn't even scraped it before coming in. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. She didn't look up, just tapped something on her laptop with mechanical precision, like if she typed fast enough, the world might not catch her. You saw the fire pit? I asked. Nothing, not a blink. They tagged every log, I said. City's citing the pit. Helena Cross is auditing the board's entire liability schedule. That includes redistribution claims. Still, she kept typing, fingers stiff, knuckles white. You used your position to seize private property, I continued, then stored it less than 10 feet from a shared use path without safety protocols. And you did it without a board vote. That's not negligence, Gwen. That's deliberate overreach. Her hands finally stopped. She looked up. No makeup, eyes red-rimmed, but the contempt was still there, thin as glass but uncracked. You think you've won, she said. I didn't answer. She closed the laptop and stood. I did what I had to do. People weren't following rules. You think you're special because you have some camera and a stamp on your logs? The bylaws give us latitude. Not without oversight, I said, and not for personal redistribution. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a printed notice. One of the fake citations, folded, creased from use, the same kind she'd slapped on my door. You don't understand what it takes to keep this place from falling apart, she snapped. The moment you let one house ignore standards, the whole block rots. You didn't enforce standards, I said. You picked winners and losers. You gave your friends my wood. She flinched just slightly, enough to tell me she knew it was true. I placed a folder on the desk between us. Inside were the latest screenshots, Willow talk threads, Cheryl's bragging, Oren's written confession, all the pieces. You have 2 choices, I said. Step down now, quietly, or I bring this to the emergency board meeting Belf just scheduled. Her face hardened. Belf doesn't have the votes. Not yet, I agreed. But they've seen the report, and Reza will be there. So will Helena. They'll bring their own questions. And your signature is all over the memos. She snatched the folder and shoved it into her bag. This neighborhood needs structure. This neighborhood needs accountability. She didn't respond. Just grabbed her coat and stormed out the side exit, the door slamming hard behind her. I stayed behind for a moment, breathing in the silence. The clubhouse smelled like printer toner and mildew, like years of unchecked authority lingering in the drywall. I walked out without locking the door. By noon, I was home, sitting at my workbench in the garage with the decoy logs spread out in a neat row. I ran my hand across the sealed caps, checking each one again. The last 2 batches were better than the first. Heavier. More balanced. A casual lift wouldn't give them away. Only someone who thought they had the right to take them would ever notice the difference. I tagged them with fresh codes and resealed the caps. Then I walked them back to the side yard, stacked them beneath the tarp like bait laid just right. Not because I expected Gwen to come again, because someone might, because now they'd have to be sure. I checked the camera feed once more, confirmed all tripwires were active. Then I backed up the footage to a mirrored drive in the cloud. Not evidence, not yet, but preparation. Everything I'd spent a lifetime teaching, protocols, logging, containment, that training was built for moments just like this, when systems failed and the truth had to be engineered by hand. The chairs were already half filled when I walked into the clubhouse on Friday evening. Not the usual board meeting, this one had weight. Faces that normally avoided eye contact now tracked my every step. Whispers cut off mid-sentence. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in months gave shallow nods, uncertain whether to be grateful or afraid. At the head of the room sat Belf Quinn, his hands folded over a leather binder. He didn't stand, didn't smile, just gave me a single glance and turned back to his paperwork. One chair beside him was conspicuously empty. Gwen's. The table where she usually planted her clipboard and her false calm was bare. No coat, no files. Just a half-full glass of water someone had left from a previous meeting. Helena Cross stood at the back of the room, leaning near the emergency exit, tablet in hand. Malik Reza was on the opposite wall, reviewing a printed site plan and jotting notes in a red pen. Neither had spoken yet. Neither needed to. Their presence was louder than anything else in the room. I found a seat near the middle, close enough to be heard, but not so close. I looked like I was staging a coup. That wasn't the goal. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. The room fell quiet when Belf cleared his throat. This meeting is called in response to inquiries filed by multiple parties concerning material removal, asset storage, and procedural authorization by the acting board president. No names, not yet. He was buying her a chance to show up, but she didn't. I've reviewed the documents submitted, Belf continued, flipping a page. Some are alarming. Others confirm what many of us have suspected, but didn't have proof to challenge. Helena stepped forward without invitation. Our firm is issuing a conditional hold on Willow Creek's general liability policy until the unauthorized property seizures and storage violations are resolved. Any further incidents during this review period will not be covered under your current policy. Her voice was measured, precise. No room for argument. A murmur rippled through the room. Cheryl Lott's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Not this time. Malik followed her. The Maple Hollow fire pit is being tagged for safety violations. Multiple untagged combustibles were stored within an active shared zone. Several items have been linked to private properties without chain of custody documentation. He looked at me, just for a second. I've opened a formal inquiry with the city. If any further evidence arises, especially if logs marked for private use appear in public fire pits, civil citations may escalate. Belf took a breath and glanced at the empty chair. Still no Gwen. The floor is open, he said. Any members wish to speak? Silence. Then Leora stood. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. My children lost heat for a weekend last month. We thought it was just the furnace, but now, I know. Our stack was taken, without notice, and we were told it had been a safety error. That's not a mistake, that's a lie. Another voice, then another. Not rage, not yelling, just voices that had been quiet too long. I waited. Then I stood. "I didn't come here to break the board," I said. "I came here to stop something that shouldn't have started in the first place. I documented everything, not to embarrass anyone, but to protect my family. My daughter's oxygen depends on that wood. My mother's health depends on heat." I held up a single page, Gwen's memo, the one telling Orrin to remove my logs without a vote. She took something that didn't belong to her, and then she gave it away like it was hers to offer. I looked around the room. She's not here tonight, but we are, and we decide what happens next. Belf nodded slowly. Motion to suspend Gwen Harrow's position as board president pending review. Hands went up, all but two, and for the first time since I'd moved into Willow Creek Row, the silence felt like progress. Gwen didn't show up the next day. Not at the clubhouse, not at the fire pit, not even at the HOA cart depot where she used to do her best impersonation of civic duty with a clipboard and condescension. But her absence wasn't silence. It came in the form of a group email, blasted at 2:17 a.m., time-stamped and impersonal, titled, "Clarification regarding Firewood Storage Initiative." She called the seizures a community redistribution effort during supply instability, claimed it was a pilot program, said the lack of board vote was an unfortunate oversight under pressing seasonal demands. And then, buried in a wall of jargon, she blamed Orrin, said maintenance logs were not accurately documented by on-site staff, and that all actions taken were under the assumption of abandoned property. The cowardice wasn't even subtle. Orrin's name wasn't in bold, but it might as well have been underlined in red. By morning, the message was already circulating with whispered fury. People forwarded it back and forth, added quiet replies, posted anonymized screenshots in Willow Talk under fake usernames. But I didn't respond. Neither did Orrin, because by then, we already knew what was coming. At 10:42 a.m., two unmarked sedans arrived at Gwen's house. Helena was in the first. Malik stepped out of the second. They didn't knock. They waited. Gwen opened the door 5 minutes later, still in her robe, her hair pinned back like she'd been up all night drafting legal-sounding lies. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. They didn't go inside, no cameras, no spectacle, just enough pressure to make it official. When they left, Gwen stood at the threshold of her front porch for a long time, holding the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. She didn't wave, she didn't glare, she just stood there. By noon, the board had called an emergency follow-up session, closed door, but this time, with minutes recorded and attendance mandatory. Gwen was present, on paper, but her resignation was submitted before the meeting even started, effective immediately. No ceremony, no apology, just a final line at the bottom of the document, unsigned but legally binding. Gwen Harrow hereby steps down from her role as president of the Willow Creek Row Homeowners Association. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. Insurance reinstated coverage, conditionally. The pit was shut down temporarily for safety retrofitting. Malik flagged 2 more zones for inspection, and every citation issued in the past 60 days was put under administrative review. Some residents protested, most didn't. By dusk, the firewood bundles had disappeared from Cheryl Lott's patio, quietly. No one saw who moved them, or where they went. And just after sunset, Orrin knocked on my door again. This time, he wasn't carrying guilt. He held a small crate, 5 of my original logs, the real ones, not the decoys. "Found these behind the fence line," he said. "Guess they never made it to Cheryl's after all." I took them without speaking, just nodded. "She blamed me, huh?" he asked. I paused. "She tried?" He gave a hollow laugh. "Didn't even surprise me." I tilted my head. "You okay?" He looked past me for a second, toward the edge of the property, where the last of the frost clung to the gravel walkway. Then he nodded. "I'll be fine." He didn't stay long, but when he left, he walked straighter. That night, I restacked the logs behind the shed, sealed the cap on the last decoy, and switched off the second layer of motion relays. I left the first layer running, not out of paranoia, but principle, because truth didn't defend itself. It had to be built, layer by layer, like a house, or a fire, or a life you refused to have stolen from you. The Maple Hollow fire pit remained cold, but for the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel watched. They reopened the Maple Hollow fire pit on a Wednesday. No announcement, no banner. Just the city-issued notice stapled to the fence. Inspection passed, safe for shared use. But that was enough. By sundown, a handful of neighbors gathered around it. A few lawn chairs appeared, pulled from garages and sheds, some still draped in plastic. Someone lit the kindling. Someone else brought cider. And for a long while, nobody said a word about Gwen. I stayed back at first, watched from the edge of the hill near the east path, where I used to sit with Mia before the pit was shut down. She loved the sound of the fire crackling, said it made her lungs feel lighter. We used to bring her oxygen tank in a rolling carrier, and she'd nestle next to the stone wall, drawing in her sketch pad under a knit blanket. Tonight, she was back in that same spot, wrapped in a red shawl, watching the flames. Leora caught my eye from across the circle. She gave a nod, small, respectful, like she understood I wasn't ready to be thanked, and maybe never would be. Across the pit, Cheryl Lott sat stiff in a folding chair, hands on her knees like she wasn't sure whether to stay or run. Her eyes didn't meet mine. She hadn't spoken since the board meeting, hadn't posted online, hadn't apologized, but she was here, and she wasn't the one tending the fire. That role belonged to Orrin. He stood with sleeves rolled up, tongs in one hand, placing a fresh log onto the embers. A real log, not hollow, not tagged, not stolen, just clean, seasoned wood, burning like it was meant to. I approached slowly, not to make a scene, just to mark the moment. Orrin noticed and gave a nod. "Still stack your corners tight?" he asked. "Always." He smiled faintly and stepped back, letting me place one of my own. The flame jumped, caught, and spread like breath. Leora clapped once, softly. First legal burn of the season. A few people chuckled. Even Cheryl managed a half smile. I looked around, familiar faces, tired eyes, but no more fear. Helena had done her job, quietly revoked Gwen's board access, and triggered a compliance training for any future officers. Malik had ordered a reprint of all citation policies, requiring formal board review before implementation. Belf, for his part, stayed on temporarily as interim president, agreeing to term limits and public meeting summaries. Things weren't perfect, but they were no longer lopsided. I found Mia where I knew she'd be, tucked behind the stone edge, blanket over her legs, eyes half closed in the firelight. "You warm enough?" I asked. She nodded. "Better than last year." "That's not saying much," she smirked. "It is to me." I sat beside her, close enough to feel the heat, but far enough to let her have the moment. We stayed like that while the fire settled into its rhythm. Pop, hiss, sigh, repeat. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Gwen's name wasn't spoken that night, not by anyone, not even in whispers. Her house lights stayed off, her yard empty, her clipboard gone. She had stepped out of the story, and the neighborhood somehow had stepped back in. Orrin joined us, briefly handing Mia a hot drink in a steel cup. She thanked him with a quiet smile, and for the first time since the first woodpile vanished, I saw something in her expression that had been missing. Relief. Not just that the wood was back, but that the fight was over, and it ended without rage, without shouting. It ended with proof. I found the last decoy log buried beneath the real ones, tucked deep in the stack like a forgotten warning. The resin was slightly warped from cold, the tag still intact, time-stamped in my own handwriting. Calder 07C redundant. I'd labeled it for backup, in case the others were missed. It had never been used. I turned it over in my hands one final time, thumb tracing the etched grain. It was lighter than the rest, not dangerous, not even remotely illegal, just hollow. Designed to make someone like Gwen ask herself a single question before stealing again. What if this one's different? That question had saved more than just my firewood. It had exposed a lie, pulled down a board president, and reminded an entire neighborhood that silence doesn't protect order. It protects control. I carried the log to the Maple Hollow fire pit just before dawn. The sky was still bruised with morning haze, frost painting the edges of the benches. No one else was out yet. I laid the decoy on the fire pit's edge and sat beside it. I didn't light it, didn't need to. It wasn't meant to burn. It was meant to end. Behind me, the community board had been stripped clean. No more flagged warnings about grass height or mailbox paint. just a simple laminated notice. New HOA elections to be held next month. Public vote. All positions open. Democracy returning like spring thaw. Belf had announced his intention to step down once the board stabilized. Orrin, at Leora's urging, submitted his name for facilities director. He wasn't campaigning, just volunteering, and that frankly made people trust him more. I stood and placed the decoy into the donation box by the tool rack, labeled it Retired Training Piece for public education only. Later that day, Mia drew a picture of the fire pit in full flame, with people gathered around it. Not named, not labeled, just silhouettes warming their hands. She titled it, Safe Again. I framed it and hung it near the front door. We haven't seen Gwen since her resignation. Rumor has it she moved in with a relative in Albany, left the HOA with a hole to patch and a long paper trail to clean up. But there won't be another Gwen, not with what we've built since. Every log is accounted for now. Every policy has a vote, and every neighbor knows that this community doesn't belong to a clipboard. It belongs to the people willing to fight for each other when it matters. Because sometimes the only way to stop theft isn't confrontation. It's preparation. It's proof. It's knowing how to turn silence into evidence and fear into action. You don't need a badge to hold people accountable. You just need to know the rules better than they do, and be willing to enforce them when no one else will. If you've ever had to outsmart someone who thought they owned your life, your home, or your family's safety, drop your story in the comments. Someone else might need the courage you found.